Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Naruto Was Stolen Liquid Gold with Hinata. So do 4 blue hearts comment, be sure to subscribe. Be to our channel and like this video and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Harry x Hermione uncensored spicy version, link in description. Hinata's skin had betrayed her. It had ripped itself open and shown all her mushy insides. Not literally of course, but metaphorically enough so that she wanted to curl up into a hole. She'd never felt so naked. Standing there in front of Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame as they bored their eyes into her body, plainly ogling her as though they really couldn't believe it. It was strange considering she was actually wearing a rather bulky piece of attire at the moment. It's just, she said, pulling the edges of the offensive clothing closer around her. The shoulders drooped over her own and she hadn't bothered to stick her arms in the sleeves, rather, she was probably a bit too afraid for that. She was wearing an old t-shirt with a trademark swirl and a very familiar orange and black jacket. Yes, definitely. She was sure if she made any kind of movement to actually put on the jacket Kiba would have a conniption. His eyes were wide as he stared at her, as though he might just seize up at any moment. Shino looked suspicious, and when Shino was obviously suspicious you knew there was a problem. Hinata. Kiba started slowly, staring at the girl whose hair was fly away, whose face was pink and whose eyes were almost as white as his own. He raised his tan hand towards the 17-year-old girl with apprehension, as though he didn't really want to know the answer. Hinata, where is your shirt? Hinata went apple red and stared at her feet. Well, you see, it got, and Naruto and, well, it was. Shino felt himself sigh internally, but the rigid stance he held did not relent just because Hinata was embarrassed, on the contrary. His whole mood seemed to darken because with her stuttering came the unpleasant feeling that she had done something with that boy. Based on Kiba's finger still dangling unsurely in the air, eyes hazed and dull, he'd probably realize any second that the trigger to his basic instinct to fulfill his earlier promise of, if he puts on a grubby finger on her person I will seriously eat him. Seriously. Was about to be switched. Shino believed him, Naruto was as good as processed dog food. Seriously. They were standing on the street outside of Naruto's apartment where they'd passed on their way to an older, less crowded training ground. Hinata had only recently been allowed out of the house, but it seemed every moment since her seaside had been spent by a certain guilty and rather dizzy Naruto Uzumaki. Shino wasn't saying he didn't like Naruto. He admired him, gave him his due credit, but Hinata was something else. This was Hinata. He supported her, loved her like a little sister and had silently vowed to be her constant caretaker after the shock at seeing her body so marred by blood he had to be told it was her. Sure, by caretaker he meant unseen. A black dot on her clothing perhaps, but constant always, although this moment now was pure, shocking coincidence. He'd sworn he'd never see Kiba look like that again. The boy he knew so well hadn't cried that way since they were young. He'd never see her lie so motionless again. He'd never feel the lead in his stomach thinking that maybe, just maybe, he might lose his cool this time. So, he'd said whatever equaled problem in Hinata's life would equal danger. He would eliminate the danger, although, even Shino had moments when his protective nature went a little too far. But then again, what was being a silent, shadowy, mysterious genius if you didn't have a little fun with being ignored? So it came as no surprise as Shino looked upon his best friend for a Seiko. ND time and gave him nothing but a small, simple push in the proper direction. Kiba, he said softly, and the poor, still horribly unsure, dog boy looked his way pathetically. Yes, she was in his apartment. Her shirt is still in his apartment. He turned his head slightly. Do you understand what that entails, Kiba? Kiba's brain seemed to turn slowly in his skull, the little mouse on the tray. D-mill slowing to a swinging stop as it stared ahead, head cocked. Shino rolled his eyes behind his sunglasses. What do you think Naruto was in Kiba, based on the information present? He turned to the girl standing in front of the complex's beat-up doors watching them both with anxiety. His apartment, Kiba said and Shino blinked unseen. Who else was in his apartment, Kiba? Hinata. Now, if Hinata's shirt was in the apartment, and Naruto was in the apartment, Is the following statement true or false given your ninja tactics and logic at divulging information based on this given situation? Kiba looked perplexed and Shino took a breath, controlling his tone to a neutral drone that left Kiba looking puzzled. Shino had a real talent for confusing him when he wanted to. Naruto was in Hinata's shirt. The little mouth twitched and visibly it came out as a spasm of Kiba's right eye. Naruto was in Hinata's. Shino watched in silent satisfaction as Kiba processed the mental image and with a final snap his face turned a dangerous shade of purple. Hinata, having watched the whole thing, instantly flung herself forward in distress. Kiba. Shino, stop it. That isn't true. Kiba, it's false. The answer is false. Hey, Hina-chan, here's your shirt, you left it on my bed after you took it off. The following transaction was often displayed as legendary, and many poor bystanders said it took on the look of snapshots of a horrible trauma as Kiba Inuzuka leapt on the future Hokage of Konoha with enough ferocity it appeared he might in fact devour his face, given the chance. What ensued left Hinata gaping. Naruto bruised and a bit worse for wear and a certain grape juice-stained shirt fluttering pitifully in the wind. And only Shino smiled, knowing he'd been wrong. It's not like I can do anything about it. Naruto. Hinata said softly, fussing with the obi on her kimono. Why couldn't I just wear, my normal clothes? Hinata sighed and looked at the young man in front of her with a smidgen of hopelessness. He was standing there, looking quite irritated in his attire, and she could almost feel the discomfort radiating off of him with each passing moment. Seriously, Hinata. This, really, he continued, picking up the edge of the multi-layered robes and long tassels drooping from the pin at his neckline. Hinata blinked. It did look a little ridiculous. Everyone has to wear them, Naruto. It's not my idea. It's just how it is. She said simply, giving her own belt one last final pat before slipping her toes into the sandals near her feet. Naruto had only appeared a few moments ago, escorted by a very sour-faced servant. Convincing Naruto to even attend the Hyuga New Year was a task within itself, seeing as he'd been already invited to go out with Ikamaru and Choji to the all-night special down at the barbecue restaurant. Hinata had almost been sad. She hadn't been invited to a New Year party since her academy days when Sakura had extended the offer. Only to be politely refused for the sake of her family's serious, yet somehow routine celebrations. But her father had insisted. And when Hiyashi insisted, it was more of a demand, and you never fell short with Hiyashi. Still, Hinata had found it strange. It had only been half a year, but it seemed she and Naruto had already become something, as dysfunctional and strange and hard to explain as that something was. It had started out an accident, but then it became purposeful because there was something that lingered under the surface of their relationship that made people confused. Neither of them could tell you which way was up about it, just that it had fallen into place like some kind of fated, awkward destiny. Still, forever was still a long time off, and they were definitely not an item. But more like closer friends that could be trusted with such things as family gatherings or grocery shopping when Naruto couldn't find the time, therefore being entrusted with a spare key to his apartment. That was another odd compulsion. Hinata, for reasons unknown, was constantly concerned about how much he was eating, or if he was going to fast or training too much. She'd never tell him, she worried silently from time to time, and so it became something of small happiness when she was thanked for the full pantry when he got home from a mission. So he was attending the banquet and Hinata was feeling helplessly tired of the whole thing, and now, standing there and looking ridiculous, Naruto was already starting to get unhappy with the whole idea, and for once was not cautious in showing his dislike to her. Probably because father doesn't hide his dislike of Naruto, Hinata thought silently, thinking of the underhanded comments they'd passed the few times they had met in actual person. But then again, Naruto was never exactly discreet about his feelings of people he didn't exactly care for. Naruto, you don't have to go, she said finally, moving past him towards the door. I wouldn't blame you. It won't be much fun unless they start drinking, then we could probably get out early, she stated matter-of-factly. Naruto looked guilty for a moment and moved to follow her. Well, it's not that I don't want to go with you, but what's the point? I mean, I've never really had a formal family, so I guess I just don't get why everyone has to be so freaking serious all the time about stupid parties. Hinata looked at Naruto and attempted to convey the reasoning, or at least find a point. Well, I know you don't get understand, but… She started, before immediately regretting it. Hand lingering on the door. Naruto looked at her quizzically. What? She looked helplessly at the door. It's like it happens every year, it's automatic. It's not that we're, well, serious about it, but you just do it. The same way Neji-ne has to wear the robes, just as my father has to wear his robes, just as I have to do the wine ceremony, it's just ingrained in us, I guess. Naruto cocked an eyebrow. You mean, Neji has to wear this? He gestured to the horribly complicated and embellished ensemble he was wearing, and Hinata nodded innocently. Only, his is even more elaborate because he's an actual family member, but my father has the most elaborate, I suppose. He can barely walk in it. Naruto looked at Hinata and a small smile pulled at his mouth. Your dad will be wearing this. Hinata looked unsure, and plucked at her own kimono. Well, of course, it's the way it is. He has to wear this big hat too, and he braids his hair. She started, trying to describe the sight of her father in his New Year's gowns, and having difficulty. He braids his hair, Naruto said, now grinning. Hinata blushed. Well, Hyuga men take their hair very seriously, it's like an old status thing, only now it's not very popular, but Neji and my father and a lot of the other main house members still do it. Oh Hinata, that is rich. I thought this was going to be boring as hell. But now, I wouldn't trade anything for the sight of your dad in a dress. Hinata smiled insecurely, but then she found herself giggling as she thought about it. Sure, she was a Hyuga. Sure, she was supposed to be stoic, but the whole premise was sort of funny. And to be quite honest, she'd never thought of it that way, but it almost seemed like Neji and her father were in fact wearing dresses. Hinata just kept chuckling to herself silently as she motioned for Naruto to follow. For now, she'd let Naruto decide for himself whether or not seeing her cousin in ceremonial makeup was worth the sake of tradition. Naruto. Silence. Naruto, please, talk to me. Hinata touched the boy's motionless shoulder, blue eyes unseeing. Don't touch me, he whispered, and Hinata instantly recoiled. He put his hand on his face, disbelieving. Did you see the way he looked at me? Hinata put her hands over her chest, aching to be near him. His hands slid up to his hair, raking through the spikes. His clothes were torn up and muddy, his face cut in multiple places. Naruto. Bastard, he screamed, throwing his fist against the wall, plaster chipping away. Hinata felt herself stumble backwards as Naruto dissolved onto the floor, falling with the bits of sheet rock. Naruto, she whispered, kneeling beside him in the center of the room. She wrapped her arms around him. Naruto sobbed into her shoulder. When Sasuke came home, Naruto always imagined he'd smile. He would be glad to rest his feet. At the time, it was the answer. For a very long time it had been the answer. It was all he had ever intended of himself. But there was a time when Naruto wouldn't have traded a mission for the world because it meant he got to go home to her. He always went as quietly as possible. He never took to windows like Kakashi. He always used the front door. She didn't like the drafts, plus he was quite positive that she would most likely mistake him if he had pulled a stunt like that. He always took his boots off first. There was that one occasion with the new carpet. How mud got on the ceiling even Naruto couldn't tell you. He always walked into darkness. She didn't like leaving lights on because she couldn't sleep that way if she slept at all while he was gone. Naruto always had to watch where he stepped. There would most likely be things on the floor. Take-out boxes on the coffee table. Cooking seemed silly to her if he wasn't there to eat it. There would be clothes on the kitchen table, laundry another task that seemed pointless if it was only hers. And she'd abandon it halfway through, most of his clothes drooping off the sides and onto the floor. Dishes would be piled in the sink. He could almost see her, putting them down, flustered and frustrated. After her concentration waned, that little novelty frog clock she'd bought to christen the apartment theirs would be ticking on the windowsill, where it would always belong. Showing off the odd hours of the night. He'd shed his armor and his shirt, and in the kitchen, the smell of blood still hot in the threads. It didn't bother him much anymore. But she always ran her fingers over the stains. And he'd watch her out of the corner of his eye as she worried them with her hands. He'd smile in the bathroom at the scattered candles set on the side of the tub. She always tried to relax. To enjoy the absence of his loud company, or the new impulsive Polaroids taped to the mirror. She always thought of him, she had to take the pictures. What if she couldn't remember a moment when he got home? He smirks and fingers a corner of one of them, Ino's 20th birthday party. Sakura looks drunk and happy. He doesn't feel bad. She'll tell him all about it, in so much detail it's like he was there. He'll notice the candle wicks haven't been lit. She probably just resorted to taking a shower, what with her hair getting so long. He'll walk out of the bathroom, finally clean and let the sliver of light from the bathroom door shed itself onto their small bedroom. She'll have a million excuses in the morning, he's sure, to why nothing's done, why she couldn't do it, but he'll just smile. Or maybe he'll kiss her. Naruto once swore he'd give it up in a heartbeat. He comes home starving, cold and dirty as hell. He reeks of death sometimes. But how else will he ever get to come home to Hinata, thrown over the bed, book still in her hands, shirt still on, in a pair of sweats? How will he come home to his oldest t-shirt curled under her chin, pressed against the side of her face? He'd give up Hokage. He'd give up Hokage for chores, and Hinata in the middle of the night. Sora didn't try to be bad, it fell out of him, these ornery behaviors. He didn't know what else to do with himself except act out. He'd been in a very dark, cramped world, for a long time, long enough that a boy like himself spent most days throwing him against the walls. And yet, to his intense frustration, he never grew an inch. He stayed small, still a child, still useless and not able to do what he wanted. His body was a foreign vessel, and often he felt blind to its potential. And even more often betrayed by its clumsiness and unwillingness to work. He'd never stretched his legs, or seen himself in the sunlight. What else was there to know in darkness and small spaces where he bumped against the walls? He shared a house with such a tangle of other boys and girls that he couldn't tell where they began and he ended, and that's when he took to throwing himself against the cages, rattling the bars, clawing at the exits. But he didn't know any better. He thought those walls were only extensions of him, limits his body couldn't overcome, it was so dark and cramped. He met the lady on a shady day in the market square when he should have been at school, but he didn't do so well there. He didn't know how to talk to his teacher or the other kids except to yell. How could they hear him otherwise? He was separated by heavy iron. He could see them, but they couldn't see through the thick metal of his walls, even though he threw himself against it with frightened in clangs and clatters of the steel curtains between him and them. He just wanted to be big. He wanted to break out and be free and be a man. He hated being 12 and stupid and useless. He just wanted for someone to see that he was okay. That he could do things for others. He was sick of being a child. The lady had been wearing white, and her hair was the color of glossy black bird feathers and tea glittered like them too, and she was smiling so nicely at him. "Would you like me to buy you one?" she'd asked as his hungry eyes had drank in the summer produce, glossy plums and peaches and summer squash at the produce stall. Fat strawberries and hot chili powder in sacks on the table nearby. He'd stared at her for the longest time in that pretty smile. He'd held out his hand and she'd put a coin on the counter and put the peach in his palm. She'd hesitated though. "Only if you help me with my bag though, all right." He nodded. Sure. He would have taken it. He would have stolen it right from under her pretty nose. The money too. Snatched from the counter in a second. He'd done it before. "What's your name?" "Sora." "What a pretty name," she'd said happily, walking to the next stall. He followed her, holding the bag in his hands. She was so bright. He couldn't keep his eyes off of her. She was the moon in the sky, the good quiet, the good darkness. He reminded him of his mother. But he doesn't remember her very well anymore. What weather. It's so gloomy, the shopkeeper said, holding out her change at one stop along the street. She only laughed and Sora kept the peach and the bag in his hands, still uneaten. Still unrifled through. He could have gone through it. Filled his pockets. Her wallet was in there, he'd seen. "Not as gloomy as my home," she'd exclaimed, putting her purchases into the bag in his hands. The woman tending the stall nodded. "Hi. Everyone misses your dear husband when he's away." She waved at the lady, and then turned to him. "Such a nice young man. Please come again." Sora didn't know what to say, but waved feebly back. Didn't she know he was a bad kid? He'd never been called nice, before. It must have been her. They came to the end of the road and Sora held the peach in his hands carefully. He'd save it for later, after dinner or something. If you ever want to help me with groceries again, Sora-kun, I'd be glad for the company. You were a very good help. He looked up suddenly. Oh, he said, and the blush scattered across his cheeks. Thanks, for the fruit, he muttered, and the lady laughed. Maybe next time my husband will come along, he's out of town at the moment. He'd like you very much, in fact you remind me of him. Sora blinked at the lady who smiled so nicely at him and put the peach in his pocket. Okay, he said, and the woman nodded in accord. Not put off by his childish embarrassment. By Sora-kun. Sora felt the fruit sink into his pocket. Everyone is gloomy when your dear husband is away. Hey, what's your husband like? 'Cause if he's a loser, then I don't want him to come. Sora shouted, and the woman with indigo hair looked back and smiled. He's a lot like the sun. Sometimes he's too much, but things just come to life when he's around. Sora didn't see her again, but he looked for her when he skipped out on school, but even then he tried not to do that so much. He didn't want to disappoint her. He didn't want her to think her fruit had gone for nothing. The day he met his new sensei thought of her. He thought of her when he saw his sensei with wild yellow hair and a large grin and tan skin and those weird whiskers. Sensei told them all that they were somebody. Sora told his sensei he was an idiot. The man just smiled and laughed and said, probably. And then he asked him to come to dinner at his house, and Sora refused. He refused for weeks and weeks, but it was starting to get hot inside his cage, like sunlight was leaking under the edges of the doors. It was getting even more cramped. His knees were bumping the doorways. His head was hitting the walls. It smelled heavily of peaches and nice words and ladies with indigo hair. He wanted to see her again. Hear her ask him if he wanted to maybe hold her bag like last time. He'd say yes. He wanted to follow her around, and he wanted to go home to her house and have her cook him whatever she was making with all that stuff she bought. She wanted to see this husband. Because he was a fool for leaving her ever, and he'd tell him so. She'd tell him she was somebody. Sensei had told him that after all, he was good for some stuff. But he couldn't see her because he was always away, or training, or with Sensei. And his cage kept getting hotter and hotter, and he was hungry all the time for something he didn't know, and his head kept hitting the ceiling. Months went on. Sensei told them about life lessons and people that he loved. The other two hung onto every word, but Sora could only think of one. She had long hair and a pretty smile. And if her husband was the sun, then she was probably the moon. But Sensei was, probably, an idiot, and when he enlisted Sora's help for his anniversary, Sora had begrudgingly accepted, because what would she do? She would have helped him. Sora, one day you're going to find a girl who makes you crazy. I just hope she's half as wonderful as my wife. Sora didn't think his wife was so special. She wasn't as wonderful as her. He bet. She was the most wonderful, but she would have wanted him to help, so he continued. The hair combs were beautiful. They'd look almost as wonderful on his wife as they would on her. Hey Sensei, does she have long hair? It didn't take long after that to convince Sora to go to his house that evening. He wanted to see for himself this wonderful wife, the one that made his quite strong and interesting sensei act so stupid. See for himself if there was really anyone that could compare. His house was nice. It had a large lawn and rooms that made you feel like you could really stretch your legs and lay out. Sunlight poured in because there were windows and a long attached porch to the back end facing the low garden wall and the regiment of potted plants. Hina-chan, we're here, his sensei had said, walking both of them into the kitchen. Sora hesitated for a moment before he saw her. His mouth dropped to the floor as she surfaced from behind the wall. Wearing a long apron and that beautiful smile. Sora felt his eyes widen as she stepped up to him, and his sensei put a hand roughly on his head, ruffling the hair. This is Sora-kun, Hinata SM. I led down at the boy with stormy gray eyes and watched as he stared at her. Naruto must not have told him it was her, just like she'd made him promise. She'd wanted it to be a surprise. She continued to smile at him as she went to a counter, took out a peach, and put it in his waiting palm. Sora felt the sun break through the rough stone, seeping through his sensei's hand and onto the floor, casting its bright fingers over his entire body. The tears leaked down without him even noticing as in a giant heave of air he ruptured the cage and left it tangled behind him and everything was white and hot and living. And that pretty lady who made him nice and that sensei that made him somebody were right there. Sun and moon and Sora could, maybe be the sky too. Hinata looked at the boy who'd seen a lot of trouble in just a few years of life and smiled so surely at him and told him the one thing he'd always hoped to hear. You've grown. Hazy, smoky bars and too many people crammed in. Back corners, familiars, strangers. Very importance, get out of here's, usuals, something news, regulars, stragglers. Imported beer, local ale. Rice wine and cheap liquor. Long couches shoved against back walls. Polaroid snapping memories she must hold onto, will eventually lose, God help her. Memories, memories, memories. Her eyes are as foggy as the atmosphere as Sasuke takes a drag, Naruto takes a swig. She sits perched on the end of the vessel that holds them all safe for now and so many have held these positions and she sees the cycle turn before her eyes as pale arms envelope each other and everyone is vulnerable and happy and drunk. I bet you couldn't get Naruto to beg for it. The voice trails off in her air as she blushes and giggles, head thrown back, the twittering voices of Tenten chirping in her ears. I bet you can't. Can't. She laughs. Tenten doesn't know better, she supposes. There's no way she'd be able to have him on such a short leash like Sakura does Sasuke. No way, no way. She's Hinata. She's too nice. She's Hinata, she's too shy. Shy girls don't play games like that. God forbid he embarrass her. Sakura chimes like summer breezes and Hinata smiles even wider. Sakura doesn't know any better. She lets Tenten keep whispering, eyes going back and forth and back and forth. Decisions, decisions. Tenten looks up at her as she starts to put down her bottle. She'll give them a show. The bottle goes discarded as she sways and sits on his lap and leans into his chest, deep down into his ear and so many eyes follow and she almost smirks. Almost, but not quite enough to count. After all, she is a lady. Naruto. Silly, fluttering hands touch his neck, she bobs her head in time with the dingy radio songs and Kiba's off-key singing. Yeah, let's play a game. What kind of game? A yes or no game. Okay. I ask you, and you say yes or no. The dandelion bends in the wind as she kisses his cheek. She's so cheeky when she's drunk. A cheeky adorable little monkey in lilac. A vision in periwinkle and ivory. He starts, voice low. Eyes follow them and he looks up at her through dark lashes and she tilts her head. Do you love me? She smiles. She starts off easy. Too easy. Yes. Will you leave me? Even easier. No. Will you? Oh, I don't know. She stretches back and twiddles with something before he draws back her attention, eyes already that dark. Ask me. She grins. Tenten clinks her glass. Sakura crosses her legs. No, I think I'll make you wait. I'm tired of this game. She purrs as she touches the collar of his shirt, still balanced on his lap. Feet daintily crossed and touching the ground. He looks agitated. Ask me. He persists and she almost lets him have her. Maybe it's my turn. How about you ask me, and maybe, she says it softly, demurely. Pretty mouth drawing out the maybe. It's agonizing. He tries to grab her but she won't have that. Suddenly she pulls back and puts a hand on his mouth, just when he's getting to the good part. And she knows how to poke him just a bit, and how to push him this way and that until he's dough in her palms. No, she says with a laugh and then the hand trails away as she bends for ward and then she's off of him and he's up too watching her with dim eyes and a foxy grin. She doesn't even bat an eyelash as she walks out across the floor and then turns briefly over her shoulder and smiles. He waits expectantly. Loving the game, loving that she loves him rolling over at her beck and call. She pauses. Sakura looks funnily irritated and keeps looking at Sasuke who's watching with hooded, lazy eyes. Tenten just looks on in awe, as if maybe, it isn't even possible that one girl could win so much at this game. As soon as he hears her prettiest command he's across the room, sauntering after her. He loves that word. Yes. He's as obedient as a puppy and all those eyes look up to other eyes and raise eyebrows, anticipating some kind of reaction as he follows her out of the bar. With his tail wagging and that dopey grin plastered to his face. How come they don't follow like that? Hinata won't tell her secrets quite yet, but then again, maybe she doesn't have any. That's the beauty of it, she supposes. Even shy girls have games when they know exactly how to play. Hinata toyed with the edge of the sheet and stared at the man who couldn't find it in himself to wake up. She didn't really mind. Sundays were sparse these days. "'Cause I love the way you say, good morning, and you take me the way I am." He needed to sleep anyway. She wouldn't complain. She'd just lay here beside him. It was all she'd ever ask for. Between them, Kiyoshi was nestled with his round little tummy going up and down with each breath he took. She smoothed the hair on the top of his forehead, head tilting as she watched him sleep beside his father. "If you are chilly, here, take my sweater. Your head is achy. I'll make it better." He smelled like milk and sunshine and his pale skin melted in with the blankets as he twitched a chubby finger in his slumber. She trailed her hand across his cheek and kissed the little expanse of skin, completely satisfied with the circulation she was losing as Yuto's heavy head settled over her other arm. "'Cause I love the way you call me, baby, and you take me the way I am." When her husband blinked awake after a few moments of her ministrations, she felt the warmth of his palm as he took her face in it and stroked it with his thumb, tickling her ear. She smiled at him and he smiled back. There were no words exchanged, just the quietness. "I'd buy you Raj, Anya, when you start losing all your hair. Sew on patches to all you tear." The quietness of growing old together, the quietness of having a little boy who was for once being quiet, the quietness of being a part of something bigger than just 2 or 3 or 100. His smile said, "Hinata," and Hinata could smile back and say, "Naruto," and it was so lovely to be able to strip everything down to a Sunday morning every once in a while. Especially after the dust settled and everyone was healing in one way or another. Constantly healing from the hurt, constantly rebuilding what was so lost. "'Cause I love you more than I could ever promise, and you take me the way I am." Kiyoshi rolled his head and Hinata chuckled before Naruto deftly slipped his hand down from her chin and stuck it on his son's abdomen. The shrieks that erupted, the tickling that pushed her off the bed, the pillows that found the floor, the just washed linens that became as tousled as their hair. The silliness of a man who killed and a woman who had prostituted herself for the sake of her people on more than one occasion, and a little boy who would walk in footsteps that seemed too small for the likes of him. The banana pancakes. The "Mama, go out and wing like higher. You take me the way I am." Hinata smiled at her son, goofy faces and no grace and absolutely no makeup. There wasn't a single person to impress, and it was so sublime to have Naruto making octopus hot dogs and bare muddy feet after discovering the caterpillars on her milkweed outside. It was the ultimate pain in the neck sometimes, but for once, Hinata didn't question anything but took it all in stride. Even when she held Kiyoshi's grubby hand and wrestled him into a bath he didn't want to take and into pajamas he didn't want to wear, and into a bed he didn't want to sleep in. Sakura didn't have that much trouble with Haru. Tetsuya was too sensible to be troublesome, especially since he already knew he'd only have to do it again the next day. But she knew Haru couldn't make her laugh so much, or get into so much trouble or be so much like Naruto that she couldn't differentiate between the two sometimes. And she knew there was no other Naruto. Not even when she slept and thought of one who always remembered to take out the garbage and didn't check, act so stupid or exaggerate everything or forget the world was in fact not only compromised of him and his goals. "You take me the way I am." Life didn't turn out exactly as she planned. It was no picnic. It was messes and old t-shirts and no nights out, no nights at all for a long time, and unexpected visitors. And too many surprises. But it was beautiful. In the same way Kiyoshi's macaroni necklace was worn more than her favorite jade earrings, it was her Sunday morning, and it was her reality. "You take me the way I am." Naruto felt the tiny hand slip into his. "We'll see Mama off, nay," he said, trying to sound overly cheerful. Hana Uzumaki was firmly unconvinced. She looked on bitterly, watching her older brother walk away with his mother towards the Hyuga side of the village. She was leaning on Naruto's leg, and he caught the longing in her eyes as Kiyoshi went off again with Hinata in tow, leaving the two of them standing on the drive to watch them disappear over the crest of the hill. "What do you want to do today?" Naruto continued. "I took the day off just to spend with you." "Isn't that cool?" Hana let a tiny, blinding smile tickle her face. "Daddy gives himself days off all the time. Mama says so." She laughed and Naruto felt the guilty twitch meet his EY. As he imagined a clear image of his wife, eyebrow raised, as he was caught sleeping in his office again. Well, Mama says a lot of things, doesn't she? He replied, not to lose any of the admiration shining in his daughter's eyes. Hana giggled again, before letting the look fall away, staring back at the street. Daddy, how come I can't go too? She asked innocently. Naruto felt the breath leave him slowly and stared down at his daughter. She was beautiful. Anyone who didn't want her was crazy, star-graving mad, not that he'd ever give her away. After all, he was her hero. She'd said so herself. She had scarlet hair tied off to one side, and wide, stunning crystalline blue eyes. A spitting image of his own mother, or so Kakashi told him each time he saw his goddaughter. And yet, Naruto smiled down at her. Unable to tell his 6-year-old that because she was as wonderful and special as she was, she'd never be good enough for one bastard of a man in his damn clan. Instead, he put up a front, being as light-hearted and cheerful as ever, if not more. You wouldn't want to go anyway. He responded, avoiding her initial question. All they do is sit around and drink tea and look serious. Naruto let his face set into a very exaggerated version of a typical Hyuga meeting, and Hana looked on, eyes wide, then laughing as her father contorted his mouth and crossed his eyes suddenly. He'd do anything he could to convince her to forget about them for the afternoon, that it wouldn't be worth her precious time. He'd lie to his little girl if he had to. So why can't I go too? I can stand outside with Tetsuya, Hana continued, looking up at her father. He's not allowed in either, daddy, when Hiyashi-sama trains Kyoshi. He says so. Naruto inwardly cursed her intuitive nature and inherited ability to see through his sorry excuses of stories. Why doesn't Hiyashi-sama let me call him Oji-san? Is it the same reason I'm not allowed in? Naruto nodded slowly. Yes. It's just, well, Hiyashi-sama has bad eyes, yeah. And when he looks at you, Hana, he doesn't see how special you are. Isn't that funny? He looks at you and he forgets that you're his granddaughter, because he gets confused by your red hair. Naruto turned around, walking back towards the house, Hana following him eagerly. You really think? Are his ears bad too, daddy? Is that why he only lets me call him Hiyashi-sama? Naruto smiled, but inside his heart broke off just a little more. Yes, baby. That's exactly it, he answered, ruffling her hair. Hana looked so bright and happy, her face breaking into a hopeful grin. Then I'll make sure that Hiyashi-sama sees me next time. And I'll talk extra loud too. Naruto laughed and opened the door to the house, letting her bound inside. I don't think that's the way you should go about it. Hana's face lit up and she ran towards her bedroom, skidding in the hallway on her bare feet before turning back to her father. I know, she shouted, I'll draw him one of my pictures. And I'll draw us real big so he can see us standing together. Do you think he'd be less confused then? Naruto just let the smile slip at her happiness to make one horrible, stone man see what was already standing there. Right in front of him. Always worth an Uzumaki try. He shouted back, raising a fist. Hana mimicked, little face set in the most basic of determinations. Hi, she chanted, and then she was gone. And he heard the distinct sound of tiny hands sifting through many things, the rattle of crayons, the shuffles of paper, the crash as something fell off of something else. Several pictures later, Hana surveyed her work and smiled. Kyoshi can give them to him next time. Naruto put on his sandals and she did the same, fumbling into her smaller pair. The Han, a formed gallery littered the porch where she'd methodically created them in the afternoon sun. Naruto enjoying a beer in the ambiance of an empty house before declaring ramen was most certainly in order. Anything to get her mind off of the mind-numbing hurt of being ostracized and never knowing why. Naruto always swore he'd tell his children whatever truth he could, that he would spare them the pain of not understanding. But once he got there, he really couldn't do it. She was still just a baby, and he'd always been especially protective because Hana was no Hyuga. If her mother hadn't been her mother, no one would have ever traced it, and that was a fact never ignored. Naruto wasn't an idiot. He heard the things they whispered about her, about his perfect little girl who couldn't do any wrong. Who was just as capable of his son. Naruto understood during that point in his life why it was his beloved third Hokage sheltered him so much. Naruto knew better than anyone that once you could grasp the reasons for your pain, those feelings of blissful ignorance would always change. Naruto lifted Hana up onto his shoulders and held her ankles as she twisted her hands into his hair, shrieking with joy. It was such a bittersweet picture. See, isn't this much more fun? You get daddy all to yourself. That's not easy to come by, you know. Naruto smiled sadly, but it didn't show. He'd never let her feel that loneliness. Hana Uzumaki was only 15 when she was apprehended by a vigilante group outside of Sound. It appeared, much to her dismay, that old habits die hard. The man's breath smelled like stale sake. And Hana struggled under his grip. How the hell had he snuck up on her? She couldn't remember, it was all too foggy, too dim in her mind. Jun lay on the ground, a few feet away, unconscious. They'd hit her with something blunt, but Hana couldn't spare the worry for her comrade. The sticky fingers curled around her throat and smashed her up against the wall, her head spun. And she felt blood mingle with the dirt that had been slammed away at the impact. The man smiled dangerously as she clawed at his wrist and hand, kicking, but quickly losing the strength to continue. Such a pity, he rasped. You would be so beautiful if you weren't the daughter of that thing. That monster your pitiful country calls a leader. Hana felt rage boil under her skin, igniting like a timed fuse. My father is a great man. The greatest shinobi who ever lived. She shouted, though the cry came out strangled and choked off as the fingers tightened. She yelped and the man laughed lowly. Twirling a kunai in front of her face, the metal glinting and razor sharp. Her blue eyes followed it and the man mocked her openly, his team laughing at the sight of the honorable daughter pressed against the wall. Helpless as a pinned animal. You are not as strong as they say, you cannot knock me to the ground, can you, princess? She gagged at the vile name as he continued, eyes narrowing, what should I do with this dirty girl? She is barely nobility let alone royalty of that pit you call a village. A pit of lies, and we all know where you come from. He chuckled and Hana felt her head begin to spin at, the edges blurring. He smirked. Like that brother of yours, do you know what they say around these parts? Hana tried to pull the unconsciousness to her ears. She wanted no ugly rumors, no horrible truth for him to say. It would shatter her, this, at the very least, would break every bone in her body before the man before her ever could. But, she was a prisoner, prisoners have no say. They say he abandoned your village, betrayed you for the sake of your mother's clan. They say he was put up to it, so blindly obedient those Hyuga eyes, just like your mother's uncle, she could almost feel his fingers swell with pride. These circles always come round, you see, first Uchihas, now Hyugas want their page in books as well. You bastard, she choked and he frowned. Watch your tongue, pig. He spat, and Hana gasped for another breath. I am proud of the word got lost on her tongue, the fuzziness dripping out of her brain and into her mouth like honey, yet she refused. She stared the man dazedly in the face, I am proud to be an Uzumaki. Hana couldn't scream as the kunai flashed. He'd sliced her skin like wet tissue, her cheek giving way under the blade so smoothly. Be careful what you say to me, daughter of a devil. Be proud now, he hissed into her ear. She felt the blood run down her face, dripping onto his fingers, dripping onto her neck, her clothes, soaking her chest. Be proud. Proud of the dirty scars that made her want to scream in agony. She couldn't, she was fighting for air, for anything. There was only pain. So much pain. Why? She hadn't done anything, and yet they did this. Who would do this? Daughter of a devil, she was Hana Uzumaki. Her father had always told her. You are Hana Uzumaki. Suddenly, it wasn't a game of names anymore. The man laughed at her. I missed a few, princess, can't have you running round with something missing, now can we? 3 more, so simply performed, like a musician with a knife. Her head lolled, her brain fought, losing quickly. There was no oxygen left. She burned. Blood soaked down. Princess, don't cry, now you'll be just like your father, and no one will ever mistake you for anyone else ever again. Daughter of a demon, daughter of scum. The taunts melted away and Hana felt something break in her, something that had been mangled by the disappearance of her brother. She couldn't find the tears to cry. No words to scream. The mirror broke, her father's image crumbled. Kiyoshi, on his pedestal, came tumbling down. There was no one to tell her otherwise. There was no argument to give. This man, there was nothing she could say. She was breaking. What was she? What was she? She was 6 whiskers. Princess, that pretty face will be so famous. Naruto wears his heart on his sleeve. When he's sad he cries. When he's happy he cries, when he's angry he punches you, and then he cries, but when he tells her he loves her, it's Hinata's turn to shed the tears. 42. Hope. One day, he'll show Sasuke what he missed. And one day he hopes Sasuke will actually miss it. 43. Night. He chooses midnight, lying right next to her in bed, the ring palmed really, really tight in his hand, just so she won't see how scared he is. 44. Star. When Naruto tells him it's okay to wish sometimes, Sora calls him an idiot and wishes he would stop believing everything that man says. 45. Courage. It's right there. Get it. Naruto stumbles in half asleep. Hinata is pointing to the space between the toilet and the wall, standing on a counter. The mouse just twitches its nose. 46. Police. Sasuke is impassive, but everyone knows he looks great in that uniform. 47. Ice cream. What do you want? I'm down with the chocolate. I like it rich and dark. Quote. One word pops into Hinata's mind when Hana places her order, Kakashi. 48. Pup. It isn't Hinata's fault that Kyoshi is afraid of dogs, but Kiba swears it isn't his either. Akamaru agrees by jumping to full height and barking. Kyoshi almost wets himself. 50. Jungle. Kyoshi is a tiger. Haru is his trusty sidekick, the garden is the steamy rainforest, and Sasuke just happens to have hair that resembles the posterior of a duck. Of course tigers eat ducks. 59. Mad. Hana, what is this? Hinata takes a hesitant look at the red substance on her clothes. It's sticky and smells like fruit. It's going to stain. Jam. Kyoshi appears from the kitchen. Bread stuck to his face and in his hair. Are you mad yet? She can't help but laugh. Starry-eyed is on hiatus ATM because I'm so busy I can't sit down and do it right, but when I find time to do that, I'll pick it up again. Kyoshi couldn't say he wasn't used to it. The darkened meeting rooms, the silent studies. We must test his loyalties. They talked about everything, anything. They talked about his mother. They talked about his father. They talked about Hana. He hated that. Kyoshi, what are you doing? Can I come too? Please. You never take me anywhere. He would never tell now about it, even though she asked constantly. He wouldn't ever say he loved her either, but she asked about that constantly too. Tetsuya knew. He could see it in his eyes as he walked into the main house, towards his grandfather's patronizing smile. Tetsuya, who was far more capable than he, Tetsuya who was his best of friends, Tetsuya who was patient and mentored him. Tetsuya who was calm and courteous. Tetsuya knew. Tetsuya never said, Tetsuya simply let his eyes do all the talking. It made him squirm. You would do anything for the clan, right Kyoshi? He loved his grandfather, how could he not? He was a doting Oji-san. He loved him, though he never said, though he never held him like his father, or kissed him like his mother, or dragged at his heels like Hana. Kyoshi knew he loved him. Kyoshi, the decision is yours, but understand the consequences if you should refuse. We will do it either way, with or without you, but your father's situation may not be so easily resolved. Kaori loomed over him, patiently cataloging his movements, just waiting to pounce for the moment of treachery that never came. And out of all of them, he went to Sasuke, the last they would ever expect, but he had to tell someone. He had to vomit up the black ball of words and thoughts that anchored him to the floor, that made him uneasy around the people whom he loved the most. He thought he'd understand him best. He did, though not without a price. Kyoshi was willing to pay, he had to have someone to give him an answer. Answers, no one ever had them, it seemed. They only had explanations, only had excuses, only had more questions. Now was the queen of questions. Kyo-kun, why do you look over my shoulder when you're kissing me? He went home with a black eye. But Sasuke never really stopped him. What about your family? Your sister? Your father? You are going to betray them. It wasn't betrayal. It was for them. Sora told him to stay out of trouble, or it would cost him. Kyoshi laughed. Always for them. To pay ahead. To pay for what would come, to save Hana. To keep her free from the wars of the past, to give their father his hero's reward, leave the title unblemished. His mother, well it woe. Old break her heart, maybe he could call it vengeance or something gaudy like that. You only have to kill one child. You can do that, can you not? It will destroy everything my father has built, it will destroy everything. Kiyoshi, it's only a sound child. No one will even know Kiyoshi, it's simply housekeeping. He'd seen that child in a photograph. A little girl. She was barely Hana's age, probably younger. You are loyal. Are you not? First to your clan, this is your blood, Kiyoshi. Your blood will always be thicker than the water of the river. You will always answer first to your blood, and second to your village. But he knew. It would start with 1, and it would end with 20. He knew. He knew. He knew. One by one until that family was slaughtered, debt repaid for that one lost brother. The world would know to never touch their family again. Never. If I do this, then it will be my own vendetta. His eyes had steeled in a way that no Hyugas ever would. You will never place this on my father's shoulders, my family. The village, none will take this burden. And they with quiet smiles said, fine. If the Uchiha could do it, then it could be done, and it would be done tenfold better. They were Hyuga after all, they were always better. One last request. You let me die. I don't want to be running my whole life. I don't want them to live with that. I will die here. Let me die to them. Let me go with a noble cause. It was always for them. Kiyoshi ruffled Hana's hair as he left. Be good, nay. I'll be home before you know it. His father smiled at him. Be careful, he said. Kiyoshi smiled back, sadly. Of course. His mother fussed, but he caught her hands and kissed them. I'll be home soon. He laughed and she just shook her head. Her son, an Anbu. She looked unsettled, squeezing his fingers. Don't do anything you'll regret. She whispered it and he went stiff before the muscles laxed. He kissed her cheeks. He didn't regret it, he'd never regret it if it was for her. They were ambushed by her family, information had leaked. He killed her brother, her aunt. He killed the child silently. She didn't even know what was happening. They had sealed him early on, as soon as her heart stopped beating it released and his head felt like it was on fire. He remembered watching Tetsuya stare at him from the corner of the main house, the two of them standing only a few feet apart. It was the last memory he'd ever have. I know what you're going to do, I know you are going to forget everything for the sake of this clan. Of course he was going to forget. He didn't want to die, but he wanted to be dead. Kiyoshi had walked to him and leaned against the house, shadows and the azaleas painting the perfect summer scene, the sweetest sentiment as he listened to Naomi singing inside and Hana running wildly on the lawn. She was golden in the sunshine, bright eyes glowing sapphire as the sky. She stretched her hands to a butterfly in the clouds. He'd always envied her, for looking like his father. I want them to live on happily, take care of them for me, especially Hana. She's going to be your responsibility now. I don't want her to end up alone. But soon all of them were gone. Not even their shadows, and he was empty all inside. He didn't know what he was or who he was. He was anything and nothing. He was just a being, just drifting farther and farther away from that glorious sunshine into the darkness. It was like everything had been pulled out of him by greedy, desperate hands. Everything he'd ever had to give, he'd given. When he woke up, two girls were looming over him. He smiled at them charmingly. Who am I? We don't know, we found you. You were staggering through our town, and you were covered in blood, are you all right? Kiyoshi smiled. He asked again, who am I? The Hyuga counted their pride like coins with their fragile fingers, all the richer. Hinata once asked Sakura, when they were younger, if she would have changed anything. Sakura had questioned her, head tilting. What do you mean? The girl's eyes had gone soft and she just looked distant for a moment. If you had the chance, would you change anything? She asked again, and she looked as though she was depending very much on her answer, staring at Sakura with the faintest smile painted to her face. Sakura had felt the constriction of being uncomfortable. There was something about the way Hinata was staring at her, it unnerved her. But at the same time, the wisdom seemed to rub off, taking hold and pushing past to the root of the question. Sakura chuckled. If you mean, would I have stopped him for real? Sasuke, you mean? Hinata nodded. Hypothetically, I've always said yes. Sakura said, tossing her pink head, but, would I really do it? Even with the feeling of all the pain and the guilt and everything else? No. She took a sip of her tea and stared into it. I don't say that because I am glad it happened. She whispered, eyes glassing over, I don't say that because I'm happy that it taught me to be strong. Of all the ways to learn, But, she stopped and looked at Hinata, her smile coming back. It had to happen, and it would have happened eventually. Hell, I probably would have just let him go. I wouldn't even have said anything except maybe, "Hey, bastard. When you're not paying attention for even a microsecond, I'm going to kick you into the next millennium." Or something like that. She laughed, holding up her delicate fist. Hinata smiled, chuckling. They settled into silence. "I'm just happy he's back now. Even if it would have taken forever, I would still be happy he's home. And I still would have let him go." Hinata nodded along with her. Bad things happen, but there's always something good that comes out. Sometimes we don't see it right away, but it comes. You'll see it someday, Sakura. She mumbled, and Sakura for some reason completely trusted her, like she already knew Hinata already had seen it way before either of them. She seemed so grown up now. But she figured near-death experiences would do that. Yeah, it'd be kind of like expecting green grass, but asking for no rain to fall. She said with a sigh, and both girls smiled. That's it for today, I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe and make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends, and don't forget to check out my Patreon. Details in description.